Thanks everyone for joining. This is the ClimateWorks Pre-apprenticeship program. It's a technical assistance workshop intended for new applicants. If you find yourself, if you're somebody who has done some of these before and you find yourself thinking, you already know all of this stuff, just please keep in mind that we're really trying to provide something for folks that are new. You're all welcome to be here and join, and glad that you're interested in participating. My name is Todd Rusk. I'm with the Smart Energy Design Assistance Center. I'm at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and part of a team working with the Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity to get this program and other programs of the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act programs launched in place, so that program administrator grantees can get in place and start operating these programs. I'm coming to you today from a perspective of, I'm on the team, so I have the perspective of somebody who has been working on program development, but also I'm someone who spends a lot of time going out applying for funding. I'm with I'm part of a group that has to go out and raise funding, apply for grants, go out and compete. And so this is something that we're accustomed to doing, and I hope to be able to share some useful experiences just based on my own experience, and based on what we know for this program. I'd also like to just make a note that I'm standing in at the last minute for another colleague who became sick, so I'm standing in on this presentation. It's possible that you will have a question that I won't be able to answer during this session. I'll try my best, but if I can't address it during this, we will get back to you with an answer as soon as possible. I would like to introduce Devin Day. He spoke a little bit just as we were getting started. He's online monitoring the chat and will help facilitate prompting me with some of the questions that are out there and outstanding and needing to be addressed. Stacy Gloss on our team also will be out there and monitoring the chat. And Devin, Stacy, just feel free to stop me occasionally when it's an appropriate time to address a question that is out there in the chat. All right, so let's keep it moving. So here's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to review resources that are associated with this NOFO and some of the time frames, so we can start thinking about how you can plan your approach to completing an application. We've got some content on building your team, thinking about capacity and skills that you need to bring, some of the nuanced distinctions between the different categories of organizations that can participate on a team. We'll talk about that, and then we'll go into some nitty-gritty details, examples on putting together your budget. Okay, so just a prompt for getting started. What questions do you have? I imagine, well, I hope that those of you that are on a team or wanting to get on a team, maybe some of you are in position to be a lead applicant, that you have put some progress in on your applications and team development. And let us know, what questions do you have in any aspect of developing the team, developing application materials, budgets, just let us know and we can get to it. So let's take a look at some of the resources that are out there right now, things that you need to know about in order to prepare. So we have the NOFO website itself. There's the link up there. The NOFO website has, and I hope that you all have seen this already. This is the place where you see the application requirements, all the documents you need to download. So that is the very first thing you need to know about if you don't know it already. We have a web page for frequently asked questions, and it is, and there's the link there. The FAQ is broken down into category of questions in program categories. So, you know, we're talking about the ClimateWorks Pre-apprenticeship program. So you can go right to the section of the FAQs that applies to questions about this program. Deadline, keep that in mind. That's going to come quick. These kinds of funding opportunities, it's a big lift. And in the John Barr last week, I believe it was last week, was delivering the GATA training for this. You know, he talked about the budget spreadsheet, and I think he talked about it as being a monster. You know, this whole process, it's a lot of work. It's a big lift. There's a lot of money on the line. So you know, don't get behind. Keep on it, because June 2nd submission day is going to be upon us very quickly. Additional resources that we have, we've got more technical assistance coming up. There's technical assistance hours coming up on May 16th and the 23rd. We are in this workshop, this technical assistance workshop for first-time applicants that is upon us right now, May 9th. And then there were the 3 prior webinars, GATA training, effective proposal writing, and bidders conference. Those are up and available on the NOFO websites. The slides are there and the recordings are there. The GATA training was a really good deep dive on some of the administrative and accountability requirements. We're going to talk about budget in depth. That training talked about budget in a different type of depth. So I think you'll find that useful to pay attention to if you weren't there. Writing an effective proposal. Brian Richard on our team with Northern Illinois University. In that session, he really dissected the NOFO and gave some in-depth ideas on how to really take apart the NOFO and respond to the NOFO, so that you are developing a proposal, an application that is responding to what DCO is requesting, and positioning yourself to maximize the amounts of points that you can accumulate in the merit review process. So there was a lot about that in that session. And then the bidders conference, Linda Larson from our team here at the University of Illinois was talking about some of the basics of kind of an introduction to the ClimateWorks Pre-apprenticeship program, what the program intent is, how it's intended to work, and how to distinguish it from some of the other programs, especially the what we call the HUBS program. So check those out if you haven't already, and if you need to go back for reference, please do that, because they're up there and available for you. So some check-in on you, your team, your organization, and your status. So we've got all of these resources, and on the NOFO website there are files that are attachments and files that indicate the kinds of things that you're required to pull together for this application. So have you gone to the site and downloaded all those files? Do you have an organized file system or file structure set up to keep all of your documents and keep everything organized? So there's I just put up a sample image of a way that, and some of the work that I do and my colleagues, when we are getting ready to apply for a funding opportunity, one of the first things that we do after doing a deep dive on the funding opportunity announcement is set up our file structure and how we're going to organize things. We download the files, the originals, and we put them in a folder, and we just get everything else ready. And so that second bullet point, you can see a sample file up there, is kind of going along with that writing an effective proposal workshop. That dissection process of the funding opportunity should also include a detailed account for all of the submission requirements. So what you need to have is you can do it how you want. What I like to do, and my colleagues, is we create a checklist for all of those things that are required, and we keep track of the status of each of those required items. And then we have our working files, and we have a special place for everything that gets submitted as final. And I guess the last thing I just want to say on this slide is just to encourage you all to periodically monitor the NOFA website for announcements, updates. We don't anticipate big changes, but sometimes edits, corrections, other things come out, and whatever is the most recent set of requirements are what you're required to submit according to. So it's in your interest to pay attention and notice when things are coming up and changing on that website. Another check-in just on where you're at. Set up the other thing that you can do when getting started is setting up your timeline for your application development process. So in the other slide, in the previous one, that was all about what, what are the specific items that you need to prepare and have together. But then, this is, the clock is ticking. We have a deadline here. So you also have to have an organized approach for when are things done. And the way that many of us like to go about that is something like the example calendar on here. So I tried to create a realistic example using the deadline for this project. This is just for illustrative purposes. I think it's a sample, so it's not a prescription of what you need to have, but it's a prompt for you to think about what are your proposal development milestones. We all have the same, you all have the same submission deadline. Everything else is according to your team and your own internal requirements. When I'm on a proposal team, I have the submission deadline, but then I also have to think about what is my internal deadline. If I have a proposal and I submit it to my boss and we push it up for administrative review the day before, it's not going to work. So, we have to have our period for internal review, administrative reviews and approvals, finalizing, all of that kind of stuff. So make sure you have those conversations, or that you just already know internally, and that your partners are aware of those timeframes, because that affects what the actual deadlines are and when you have to complete everything. So think about your internal review processes and timeframes. That tells you when you have to have all of your complete 100% drafts ready to go. On the second to last week on May 22nd, have a just kind of a, you know, a time frame for when you want to be thinking about firming up your budgets, and just kind of compiling and doing all the, doing all the edits. Anyway, so it's an example for you to consider. It's a way that I would approach it if I were applying for this one, and it's how I think about it on other opportunities. So what's your status? Where are you? How are you doing these things? Do you have your partners or prospects of partners? What are their roles? What is your role in the team that you're participating on? Whether you're the lead or whether you are a partner providing a specialized role. And then just finally, getting back to that development, that application development timeline, have some kind of calendar and milestones, because there's just too much work, there's too many details to just kind of wing it. It takes a structured approach and having a whole team that are aligned on what that approach is. I'll pause for a second. Devin, are there any questions that we should take?
I think we're all good for now. There were a few questions that came up about the notice of intent to apply and whether that was required, but that is optional. It's just something that DCEO asks potential applicants to complete to kind of smooth the process, and that deadline for the letter of intent to apply is May 12th, 2023, and Stacy included some other information that is actually within the NOFO on page 23 for anybody who is curious about that optional stipulation.
Right, thanks, Devin. Okay, now we're going to talk about building your team. So there's a lot that goes into the pre-apprenticeship program, the ClimateWorks pre-apprenticeship program. So what we have up here are the main elements of the program and of the required elements of the technical narrative in the NOFO that you are going to have to talk about, explain how your team is qualified to do that, and explain your understanding of those tasks and how you are going to accomplish those on a timely basis, according to the requirements of the NOFO. So just thinking about it from the team building perspective, you have to make sure you have all of the capabilities, all of the organizations on the team who can provide those services and deliver on those tasks. If you don't have it, you're going to have to keep working at it. So here's one structured approach on how you might go about keeping track of that, getting a sense of what gaps you need to fill out. So you can take all of those required elements, can make a matrix or a table, and kind of get a sense of what you're able to do or where you need help, and then indicate categories of partners or specific names of partner organizations who can provide those services and deliver on those tasks. So this is just something you can consider as an organizational tool to help figure out whether you have covered all of your bases on partnership. So some additional resources. How do you find partners? There's a contact list, and so just encourage you to think about the strengths of the organizations on your team, and how you can meet the requirements of this program. Who's going to deliver construction training? Who's going to offer those support services? Make sure you've got everyone lined up who is ready to go when the program, when you're selected and when the program is ready to go. if you're selected, you should say. So here are some, you'll need to think about the types of training that you're going to provide, and some of that has to do with partnerships with apprenticeship programs or employers or other providers that you're going to partner with. So this is about clean energy jobs. We all, I think we've tried to reinforce that there's a lot that a clean energy job can be. We have some definitions of that, but here are some categories that fit into that. So your pre-apprentices are going to need a place to land after they're done with the pre-apprenticeship training. And really the idea is that they're going to land in an apprenticeship program. So make sure you have those spelled out and those partnerships lined up. And in some cases, having employers as an endpoint for some of the folks that go through the training program. So when we talk about partner organizations on your teams, we have these main categories up on the slide here. There's the main grantee and recipient. And so if you are going to be the main recipient, then all the accountability lands on the main grantee recipient. So that's where the buck stops, and it's important to ensure that whoever that is, that they meet the eligibility requirements to be the grantee, the main grantee. So there's also subrecipients or pass-through entities. So these are organizations on the team that are contributing to the deliverables of the program. You can't necessarily replace them with just anybody. They're an integral part to delivering some required aspect of the program. And then a contractor or vendor, those are folks that sell pieces and parts, could be equipment, could be materials. There's some procurement standards for dealing with those, but your contractors and vendors don't necessarily have to be spelled out in the same level of detail as some of your subrecipients. So we'll talk in a little bit more detail on the implications of that, but there are, the way that they're treated in your budgeting exercise, they're affected that way. And then the way that, whether somebody is a subrecipient or a contractor or vendor, it affects the level of paperwork associated with them, and what they can do and how they can participate, and what happens with funding. Okay, so here's some quick tips on if it's a subrecipient relationship. How important are they? So are they able to determine participants' eligibility of this training participants to participate? Do they make important decisions about how the program operates? Do they do something that's important for the deliverables and the goals? And are they doing something that is really required? You can't, if there's not somebody doing that role, you don't really have a competent team. So those are some ways to think about if it's a subrecipient.
Before you move on, Todd, we had a good question in the chat about subrecipients. Are subrecipients able to hire contractors?
Yes. Yeah, subrecipients can hire contractors. That would that would have to be spelled out on the, so subrecipients have to have their own separate budget and budget justification. So if a subrecipient has a contractor budget, then that would show up. I'm sorry, if a subrecipient was hiring contractual services, that would show up in the subrecipient's budget. So this, I like this. I like this table for just kind of giving you a quick view of who can do what is required of whom, as far as main grantees, sub-grantees, and contractor vendors. You know, if they're a contractor or vendor, they don't have to be GATA qualified. A sub-grantee also doesn't have to be GATA qualified, but if they are not in good standing in Illinois, say for example, they were involved in a project that didn't go well, and for some reason that non-performance is attached to or associated with that contractor, then that might preclude them from being a subrecipient on the project. So all of these, anyways, I would just say, you know, take a moment to review all of these things, and this gives you a sense of the. It doesn't tell you. This doesn't tell you whether someone is a contractor or a subrecipient, but it tells you what the implications are. And then just a note on accountability. You know, everybody, these are important projects, and in state funding, we have to, you know, we have to think about accountability and good use of taxpayer funds. So, but in terms of the projects, subrecipients, providers, you know, if they're not performing, they can be removed or replaced, and that would be a process with the main grantee, perhaps in coordination with the department. But like I was saying earlier, in terms of overall accountability for the performance of the project, it all comes down to the main grantee. So if you're the main grantee and something is going wrong with the project, it doesn't really matter if it's something wrong that a contractor did or that a subrecipient did. It is still your responsibility, and you're held accountable for addressing and correcting the situation, or, you know, other remedies. So building an effective partnership. So there's a lot of you know, we keep encouraging with this type of work. It's good to build partnerships and have a team, a cross-functional team of organizations who can deliver all the services that are required. So, you know, in doing that, there's all of these, here's some ideas, some things to think about in your communications and in your practice of developing partnerships with the organizations. And just, you know, want to especially encourage you all to think about early on, as early as possible with your partners, agreeing on tasks, how they will be done, you know, just thinking about those roles. The longer it takes for a team to establish roles and responsibilities, the harder it is going to be to develop a competent, responsive proposal and get it done on time. So as early as possible, heavy on the early communication with partners, coming to common understanding, who's doing what, getting out some of those early preliminary expectations. And you know, you can't necessarily expect to get started and talk about you know, detailed dollar amounts but it is helpful to talk about budget in terms of rough expectations early on. So you have some sense of where people are at, and you're going to have to negotiate and refine as you go on. So communicate early, often, and constantly. One of the demonstrations of a committed partnership is a memorandum of understanding. And in the NOFO, you will see that there is a requirement for memorandum of understanding as documentation, as evidence of the committed partnership of the organizations who are on the team. So it's like it says on the slide, it's a mutual statement of commitment, and there's a bunch of information up on the slide of what it entails. So you're saying, you're agreeing what is going to be done, what's the nature of the partnership, what are your common understandings, what's the financial arrangement, requirements, signature, and date. That part is important to show that. So this would be something you would want on the letterhead of either the main grantee or the subrecipient, depending on how you want to structure them. So who should do that? Subgrantees should have one, and like it's as it's implied on the slide here, it's not necessarily required that registered apprenticeship programs or other employer organizations, it's not necessarily required that you have those memorandum of understanding, but it is required that you have some type of evidence of those partnerships with registered apprenticeship programs. So a memorandum will really strengthen your application, and that will, if I'm thinking back to the scoring rubric and the evaluation criteria in the technical portion of the NOFO, you will find that there are some points awarded that are related to the strength of the evidence of partnerships and registered apprenticeships. So again, I believe that in at least two of the workshops, a lot of emphasis on going back to that, going back to the requirements and that matrix of how points are awarded. And so I just come back to it on this one, because there's a category specifically along these lines. So anyways, just keep going back to the evaluation criteria. That will help you. Okay, so that was our content on building a team and partnerships. And this next section will go through budget definitions and a walkthrough and some example on the spreadsheet and how you can do some of the development there. Devin, are there any questions we should take up at this point?
I think you've done a good job of covering everything.
Oh, thank you.
Thus far.
Okay. We'll keep going. Okay, budget definitions and walkthrough. So another prompt for questions. Do you have any questions about budget? Any points of difficulty or struggle? Drop us a note in the chat. Let us know. And if there's something that you'd like us to take up, we're happy to address that question. Some things to know about the budget template. I hope that at least most of you have looked at it already or downloaded it. It's an Excel spreadsheet, and it is preloaded with lots and lots of tabs and auto calculation formulas. And it starts with the first tab all the way to the left. If you imagine a spreadsheet file with some instructions. So I think the first thing that I want to emphasize about the budget is that very first tab on the spreadsheet, those instructions. There are some really detailed instructions on how it works, how to fill it out. And I can't say it is the most interesting reading that you will ever do in your life, but it is important for understanding how to put together the budget spreadsheet and completing it in a way that uses its functionality and doesn't break itself in the process. So take the time, whoever is responsible for that on your team, to get familiar with those rules are, and also in addition to what we go over in this training session, I mentioned earlier in this presentation, there was a GATA training session by John Barr at DCEO. He talked a lot about budget. So there's a lot of useful information in there that you'll find helpful. And another resource that is in one of the earlier slides in this deck is a link to grant resources. Let's see, let me make sure I remember what that one's called. Grant Basics. So that's up early in the slide deck, and the slide deck and recording will be available later. So the DCO website has a whole section on grant basics, terminology. They have what they call a grant basics learning library. So if budgeting for a state award like this is new for you, that will be a helpful exercise to go through and learn about those resources, because they're terminology that may be unfamiliar or that may be different from budgeting or financial terminology that you use in a different context. So that is worth your while. So, just back to the bullet points here, the spreadsheet, it's a standard template. Some of the sections will apply to you, some of them won't. And as you dig into it, one of the so there's this point up here. It says it does a lot of the math for you. I emphasized a minute ago, looking at the instructions tab. I also encourage you to just, before you start populating anything in the budget spreadsheet, is to just click around inside the spreadsheet in some of the different tabs to get a sense of where the calculations are, how they work. Just get a sense of what it is that you're working with and what kind of functionality and calculations and auto processes are there, so that you know what it is, and that will help you as you dive into it. And then, just one, and this was also mentioned in the GATA workshop. The idea is that we want applicants to fill out their applications, narratives, required documents, budget, all those things according to the requirements. If you make a mistake, that's not necessarily, it's not going to kick you out, so the assurance is that it's really interested in finding teams that look like they're qualified, they know what they're doing, and are ready to do it. And in the process of selection, there will likely be negotiations, work with you on anything that needs to be fixed and corrected. So if you're selected, then you can expect that there will be some process to come to some final agreement on what the award amount is, and some of the terms, and any issues that need to be addressed to move forward with that. Okay. So there's a lot of different ways to go about doing budgets. So we know that with this program, we anticipate up to 3 awards. We anticipate that the maximum award for any applicant is $6.5 million per year for 3 years per award. And then as you look into the NOFO, you can see there's a little bit more nuance guidance on anticipated range for the ClimateWorks training aspects of the program, and then the funding range for the wraparound services, the barrier reduction program services. So all those things are there, and I guess the point that I'm getting at is that you have a sense of the upper limit, or the big number. What's the total request amount? And so in the following slides, I'm going to walk through some different ways to think about how you arrive at that final number. And so, I think about top-down budget approaches where we start with the end in mind. We've got our big number. Let's say you go for the maximum amount, $6.5 million a year. So you start with that, and then you work down from there to figure out the details. Other approaches are more bottom-up approaches, where we think about the activities that we're doing, the kinds of deliverables that are required, and all of the money it takes, and the accounting to and how all that adds up to the final amount. And then in reality, in practice, at least my experience and what I hear from just about everyone else who does this stuff, is that it's a combination of those approaches. There's some top-down approach where you take your upper limit as some guidance, kind of, what you're about where you're, trying to aim. And then you also combine your bottom-up approaches, and you're going to need those bottom-up approaches as you develop your spreadsheet, and to be able to provide the level of detail and justification that is required of a competent application. So you're going to have both of those things going on. And so, as we go through some of these next slides, that's a little bit of the idea, combination of top down and bottom up. So, in the NOFO and in the FAQs, you'll see some questions about approximate or estimated budgetary amounts of $10,000 per year of program funding per student for the program costs. So that could be a number that you grab onto for your early budgeting exercise. So you might think about on your team, you've got some organizations that are connected to the communities, that are connected and aware of, and in contact with populations that you think can benefit from this program and would be interested in participating. So you might have a sense of how many people are out there, that based on your knowledge of the communities and the regions being served, that you can bring to this program. So you could use that and a $10,000 per student as one approach. And then, then be thinking about if you're doing a cohort-based approach, how many cohorts is that? You might have budgetary considerations that go with a cohort type model if you're doing that. You need to think about where the training will be offered. If you think back to the NOFO maybe it was on the first or second or third page, there's a map of the locations. Those are big, they're big regions of the state. We've got 3 regions for delivery of this program. So how many locations, how many satellite locations will be offering training services? We can't really expect that we're going to have participants traveling all across, say, the northern region or the southern region to get to one location. So think about what it costs to maintain, staff, operate those different locations, and then the staffing that is required for the number of locations and training sessions that you'll be offering. And then I guess it's also just important to recognize, and this is called out in the NOFO, that you've got a staffing plan attachment, you've got kind of a description of personnel in the technical narrative, and then here you see that there's also going to be some descriptions of staffing in the budget, and you want to make sure that those things are all saying the same thing, or they're all adding up to the same people, the same personnel positions. You don't want to have your staffing plan look different or incompatible with what you have in your technical narrative. And certainly it can't be something that looks totally different than what is in your budget. So you've got you've got multiple separate materials that you're required to submit. So you have to make sure that there's consistency between all of those things. So you also have to think about timing. How long is it going to last for each participant, each cohort? So time is money. So that's one basis for thinking about how you build a budget based on time. You've got transition services and wraparound services. So these are areas, they're activities and areas of the budget that are dependent on the number of participants. So that's not really to say what are all the services that are going to be offered to them. But if you don't have a sense of how many people are going through, how many people you anticipate going through your program, I think it's going to be a really difficult exercise to have a convincing budget justification on how you arrive at your transition services and your wraparound services budget, or any other aspects of the budget for that matter. The last thing on all the way to the right on this slide is reporting and administration. This is an easily and often overlooked activity and task area and budget activity in projects. So, I mean, in a way, I can understand why that is, because it's not really what we're here for. We're here to deliver these really important services to people that need the services, to help play this part in the clean energy transition. That's what we're here for. That's what we're excited about. But in order to do that, we have to think about the administrative aspects. Some of those are direct, some of them are indirect, and we'll get into that. But I just want to emphasize that it's really important that you don't shortchange your team and your budget on the amount of time that is needed to that you will need to spend on coordination meetings, reporting meetings. I mean, lots of us grumble about meetings, but the fact is you have to allocate for that time, because otherwise your budget's going to be out of whack, and you might find yourself running short on being able to provide what is needed on other aspects of the project. So just make sure you account for that. We'll talk about that. We'll talk more about that as we get into direct and indirect. So staffing is in this line of work. Staffing is, we can anticipate, one of the larger shares of budget in your project. So think about personnel costs. There are all these different, so up here on the slide are examples of positions and roles that the different personnel and staff on the team will play. So how many of those people are there, and what level of effort of each of them is required, and what does it cost in terms of salaries or hourly wage? All of that goes into the math on the spreadsheet, building up what those costs are. So these are all things that just have to be accounted for. And there's a tab in the spreadsheet for a lot of these things. So this, you may have noticed already in the NOFO that the payment model it's a performance-based payment model. And so that means that in some way, the teams who are selected will receive payment based on delivery of or accomplishment of key deliverables. There's payment that is based on enrolling participants, getting people to complete the training. So thinking about the budget and in the narrative, in the NOFO technical narrative, there's a discussion section about cost effectiveness. These are some of the categories where cost effectiveness comes into play. Program cost per participant, cost per per participant who completes the program and transitions into a registered apprenticeship program or other important outcome. So your budget that you submit doesn't necessarily have these pie charts or graphics, but just for illustrating how things might break down, how you might internally represent what's going on in the budget, what is, where is money going? These kinds of quick snapshots, I think, are important for making, one thing is you can take a quick look at it and get a sense of, does this look kind of reasonable, or is it way out of whack? So if I look at this and, my personnel cost is 6%, instead of 50%, I'm really going to be wondering, where did we go wrong? So, think about it in those kinds of terms. Support services. So the support services that's the energy transition barrier reduction services. So this NOFO is a combination of two different kinds of funding. There's the pre-apprenticeship program funding, and there's the barrier reduction funding. And so, you want to think about the level of funding for both of those. And when you're accounting and adding everything up, you want to make sure that your distributions add up to what you anticipate from like a high level top down budget perspective. Okay, so now the budget categories in the template. So if you pull up the budget template and put it next to this slide, what you'll see is that there's a tab for personnel and a tab for fringe benefits and travel and equipment. All of these things have a tab. And these tabs are the places where you are going to progressively fill out information, your detailed information on the budgets and your justification information. So that's where you'll focus a lot of your budgeting activity, and then it sums and calculates in one of the high level tabs. So we'll go through some examples on how you might approach some of these. So we have, so here they are. This is the overall budget. And so if this were the budget for the lead grantee, then the sum of all of these numbers would be the total project request. If you are a sub-awardee or sub-grantee, then each sub-grantee is going to be so like if this is the main grantee's award, all the sub-awardees and contractor services, they're going to add up inside this number right here, on this line 6 here. But each of the sub-awardees are also going to fill out their own spreadsheet too. That's one of the implications of being a sub-awardee. So we'll go through these things with an example. Personnel. So what is implied by personnel, and in some of your accounting and budgeting work, you may have a different detailed understanding of what is implied by personnel costs. In this particular spreadsheet, personnel costs means salaries and wages. So if you're thinking about fringe benefits and those kinds of things, there's a separate tab for that. So don't put it on here. This one is just for salaries and wages. So, you line up all the positions who are on there, salaries and wages, the calculation basis, whether it's a yearly or hourly basis, and, the percent full-time equivalent for each of those. And then the spreadsheet does the math. I think in the personnel costs in that row all the way, or that column all the way to the right, personnel costs, that's where the calculation formula is. So this is for if I'm the main awardee and I'm applying, then the positions on here are for the staff on my team, and the staff on other organizations on the team, those are going to appear elsewhere in the budget. Okay, so fringe benefits, some descriptions of what that is. I suspect that a lot of you in your accounting or finance, the people or departments who are responsible for that. So where I'm at, we have a kind of a fringe rate percentage. It's just fixed and assigned based on an employee category or employee class. So if that's what you have, then then you go with that. And so in this case, in this example, we're talking about a personnel cost for somebody who's cost $50,000 a year in terms of their wage or their salary. And we are projecting that they're going to be working 50% time on this particular project. So this is their personnel cost. And the fringe is the other benefits and things that go with it. And so in this particular example, what we have is an example of an organization where that particular employee is subject to a 25% fringe rate, according to the way that organization accounts for it. So in this spreadsheet, the way you would do it is you multiply the total, your fringe rate times the salary amount times the full-time percentage, and then you get your amount. And anyway, so here's an example of how you can calculate it. So in the spreadsheet, this is how it looks. You've got your base salary or your wage. You've got your row where you have the fringe rate in terms of a percentage, and then the column with the fringe benefit cost that has the auto calculate formula in there. Travel. So we can expect that a lot of the organizations involved are going to have travel costs. So this could be in terms of mileage reimbursements for your staff. It could be, in this example, it's hiring a bus who's going to take some participants on some number of field trips. So you have your travel tab on the spreadsheet, and you just build it out. You figure out the miles, if it's about a mileage reimbursement basis, and you justify it by writing in the purpose, and you just build out your justification, and there's room on all of these tabs for a more detailed and lengthy justification narrative. So that's how you build it out, and it's the same thing over and over in all of these tabs. If I'm a main grantee, then the travel that I'm filling out is for travel. Let's say on employee training, those would be for my employees, not my partner's employees. And if it's for the field trip, then what that means is that it's coming out of my, my organization is responsible for, paying that bus company for that trip. If you are thinking about travel that your subawardees or contractors are going to do, that doesn't go on your budget. That goes on their budget, and you would account for that in your subawardee and contract services costs. And the other note to call out on here is if you are providing some type of voucher or payment to help your participants do to travel, then that's a wraparound service, and that doesn't go into travel. That would go into the support services tab. Equipment, I think that's pretty self-explanatory. I think we do have a slide where we talk a little bit about what's the difference between equipment and materials, and then there's other resources that have talked about that lay that out. But yeah, here we go. So equipment, durable items, they have value. maybe they're subject to depreciation and they retain value. So that's equipment. And then supplies, it's the stuff that just it's not valuable after you use it, but you need those things. You know, we all need paper and ink cartridges and stuff like that. So you build it out like that with your supplies. Contractual services. If you are the lead grantee, then your subrecipients and the contractors and vendors the contractors and vendors that contract directly with you, they would go on this tab in your budget. If you are a subawardee and you don't have any contractors or subawardees under you, then this would just be empty. If you're a subawardee and you do have contractual services or something else, then you would put something here. Here's another tab that you may or may not need to fill out depending on the nature of the type of spaces that you're using, but occupancy. So these would be direct expenses. So this starts to get into a little bit how we differentiate, where we differentiate, or this is one aspect where we differentiate direct from indirect costs. So if let's say you're doing a training program and you have rented space specifically for the purpose of doing this ClimateWorks pre-apprenticeship program, then that would be directly attributable to this program. If you already have a space and you use it for everything that you do, then that would be an indirect cost. It's necessary, you need it, but it's not directly tied to this particular program. So that would be something that goes into the indirect costs as opposed to the direct costs. So the same thing with things like utilities and so that's a little bit on occupancy and some of the distinction of direct and indirect costs. Training and education. I think the thing to really highlight here is called out in italics and in color. This is not the training and education that you are delivering to the participants of the program, but these are, if you need to do training and education with your staff and your employees for the purpose of building their capacity and their skills to do this program, that's what applies here. So if you anticipate doing that kind of training and education, then you would record and report that on the budget. If you don't anticipate that or a need for it, then you would just leave this particular tab blank. Direct administrative costs. So again, administrative costs are normally treated as indirect, meaning kind of like when we were talking about the space just a minute ago. If I have an administrative staff who, we need these folks to keep the place in operation, but they are kind of responsible for administering all kinds of stuff. And we can't necessarily attribute their level of effort specifically to this project and that project and that project. Like if I have an administrative staff, let's say some accounting personnel, and some other office support. If I don't have a way of directly saying their level of effort on this specific project, then that would be an indirect cost, and that's accounted for that way. If you can do it, then you would add it up. You would add it up on this direct administrative costs. Okay, industry focused training. This is the training that you're going to be delivering to the participants, and these categories here. These are like the note says, you can't change what these categories are. So this was an intentional exercise in setting up the budget template, that we anticipate that the cost categories are going to align under curriculum costs, instructional delivery, work-based learning, and practicum, and stipends. So you know, you will have some detailed line items that fit into that, and so if you feel like it's, well, what you have in the budget template is places where you can go in on each tab and write in justification language, explanation for something that you think needs to be explained in a way that maybe the rows on the spreadsheet wouldn't quite capture. Supportive services. As I said before, and we have talked about in some of these other workshops, this includes the energy transition barrier reduction services. So there's the training program, like the explicitly training program, and there's the barrier reduction, the wraparound services. So you build out these items on this particular tab for supportive services. And then, like is noted in the orange box here, if a partner is delivering training, then their supportive services will go into their budget, and if you're the lead grantee, all of that will show up in the subawardee contractual line for you. Okay, so a little bit more sum up on direct versus indirect costs. Hopefully this is starting to feel consistent with the way that I've talked about in some of the other examples. Direct costs, you can directly account for them. They, in an explicit way, they contribute to the performance of the project and accomplishing goals. They're things that you can specify and that you can associate with the requirements of the project. And then indirect costs are ones that are more difficult to specifically account for with the operation of this program, as opposed to just general overhead operations. The GABA training workshop that I referenced a couple of times already had some extended discussion on indirect cost rates. But here's just a little bit of repeated information on indirect cost rate. It's, in terms of preparing a budget, the indirect cost rate is a percent number. If you don't have a negotiated rate already, you could choose to waive indirect costs, or you could charge a de minimis rate. If you would like to negotiate a cost rate, then there's a process there's a process to do that, and you're free to do so. So the indirect cost is calculated as a percentage of the direct costs, or as a percentage of a direct cost basis. There are certain categories of direct costs that cannot be that aren't accounted for in the basis. So, for example, if you have some administrative overhead costs that you explicitly budget for and line out in one of those earlier tabs, or then that would be something you don't calculate indirect cost on that, because that would be double counting. So pay attention to how you do those things. Hopefully the people or financial officers or department in your organization are familiar with how indirect cost rates work. They already know what the indirect cost rate is, or they can determine it quickly and can provide you guidance if you are in a position where you're wondering or not sure. And you can, of course, we have our technical support services, and you can contact us. So budget narrative, the budget spreadsheet has multiple places for written justification. And so the question is, well, what do you put there? What should you include? And really what you're trying to do in the budget spreadsheet is you're lining up in the tables, you're lining up the quantitative numeric basis for justifying the total project costs. And in your justification, in your written justification, I like the expression here. It's a place for you to show your work and explain how you got to those numbers. You are going to have assumptions that you will probably conclude that it's important for you to explain what those assumptions are, your calculation basis. So the idea here is that you want to be transparent about how you arrived at your numbers, so that when your proposal and your budget is being evaluated, the reviewers understand what's going on, and hopefully they give you the maximum points for being able to understand in clarity and reasonableness of the budget. So that's what you're going for. So like it shows each each section in the spreadsheet has a place. You need to be you're not writing this isn't writing a whole new proposal in these. So be concise, but be specific, offer details. Just tell the details and the story that's needed to get your point across about the justification and how you arrived at these numbers. Also, there's a point about considering inflation. This program is a 3-year program, so that you don't find yourself in a financial difficult position in years 2 and 3 by not accounting for inflation. Make sure that you account for inflation in your budget. You should anticipate that your personnel expenses and other types of expenses will increase in years 2 and 3, and hopefully your finance professionals or the people who are responsible for your budget have a lot of organizations have fixed assumptions for what inflation rates are for certain kinds of expense categories. Okay, your budget narrative. more of the same, be specific and concise. Just say enough to get your point across and make it clear what you're doing and to show your work, and make it clear how you arrived. Provide supplemental information. If you've got some big numbers for certain types of contractual services, it would be helpful to include quotes and invoices for those kinds of things as a basis. And like a point I mentioned, excuse me, earlier, just make sure you've got consistency between your budget narrative numbers and we've got in your spreadsheet. Across all of your documents, you have to make sure you've got some consistency. So some budget narrative, each of these sections are going to have places where you put some justification language. So some things that you can do is, so for personnel, if you have you name the positions. If you have people who are operating in those positions already, you could specifically name those people, describe what they're doing on the project. With your consultants and contractors, it's important to define what they're doing. If there's if you've got $300,000 in contractual services, you need to explain what that is, who's doing that, what are they doing. If you've got subawardees that have with all of your subawardees, they have to they have to have their own budget spreadsheet. But if you're if you're in the lead, you need to explain what each of them are doing. You could refer to their scope of work. So again, this is just the story about how your budget came to be. Similar with equipment and travel, so you can read those. So we're coming up on the last slides here. Just have a couple reminders. One is that we've got some technical assistance sessions coming up on May 16th and the 23rd. This is a Zoom meeting. This is, it's office hours. So we are going to have staff in a Zoom room, and the Zoom link and password and meeting information, that's on the NOFO website. So you can just show up anytime in there and bring your materials, bring your questions, whatever you want to talk about. We'll be there and we can offer individualized support. So if that's something that might be useful for you, then please make yourself available to show up, and we'll be happy to help you as much as we can. And then some reminders on some budget and grant resources. The link on the top, this is the Grant Basics website at DCEO. I mentioned that one earlier. So lots of useful, detailed information on all these topics here. So if you need a deep dive on administrative versus programmatic, or direct versus indirect, how does indirect cost, and all those kinds of things, a lot of information there. And you are also welcome to submit questions at this link here. And we answer those questions as quickly as we can and post them in the FAQs. So that is the last slide. Devin, do we have any questions that we need to address before we finish for today?
We haven't received any more questions in the chat, but if anyone has any burning questions, now would be the time to put them in the chat and have them answered. And if not, you can go ahead and submit those questions if you think of them later to the link that I just shared in the chat. And you can also email us at ceo.cja@illinois.gov with those questions. So either way, we'll get them and we'll get you some answers.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. Good luck on your applications. We're really excited to see the interest, and we are really excited to see the field of organizations out there who want to deliver these important services. So thanks to you all. Good afternoon.